Hello, my name is Anthony Wall. This is a video about invention. This is about the identity of value/value progression, that inventions work or not in relationship to it, and they are further positive or not in relationship to it. In this science, which is not one grounded to an identity of the ground location node, because the sciences are victims that were forced to counter it by defending roles with abridged sciences, where and how sciences can't help but be value to identities individually grouped together, distinctly and non-distinctly and simultaneously, in demonstration of how, no matter who you are, individually grouped together, there's one identity of volume that is more finite than three identities of zero, and then it is greater than infinity, making more of itself, which is why and how the phenomena of three identities of distinct, non-distinct, and simultaneous identities of zero as identities of volume only increasing exist simultaneously, where and how an identity that is greater than infinity, but while being its value, exists bigger than the identity of infinity, but while being its complete volume, distinctly and non-distinctly and simultaneously, while being itself a scientifically discernible identity of value/value progression. So we have the theory of relativity, offensively to obfuscate and to keep obfuscated, to keep exploited and having been exploited through all kinds of motivations, natures, needs, interests, for collusion between criminal insidiousness, natures of positive and of negative, and collusion, where and how we are fact cheap in nature, where and how we are this particular identity of the ground, identity of relationship to our particular identity of volume as fact cheap in nature, where the species identity, this is why species are manifest, how they are manifest. I tell it best. I'm not even a doctor. The cell nucleus, the cell body, and the cell wall, they are visibly manifest in demonstration of the invisible but still discernible, this identity of relativity, this identity of value/value progression coming through them, with where and how the cell walls connect the body of value. We are a quality of diffusion, where we are temporary positive, we are temporary/lasting positive or negative, criminal insidiousness nature, like wrongdoers, like involved with people who commit predicate acts, which are also completely fact-cheaping nature-oriented. So we have overt proofs of a breaching method having been entrenched in what is now America, that a breaching method that our founding parents wanted us to have explained and understood and known with American history, but they didn't have free speech yet. And so they invested everyone to motivations, natures, needs, interests as victims, to defenses of it, that as logic that requires self-valuing, where and how, types of experts, types of identities, the law, types of identity of the ground relationships, all identity of the ground relationships. Since before computers, we had these database relationships. Since before they were layered roles with this, it was already all the identity of the ground locations. So what that dude knew was going to keep all positions of formal fact-cheaping nature needed to self-value how each individual of each age of human fact-cheaping nature is maintained tactically self-valued. All locations where positive and negative, where strangers want to meet each other, that is complete possession of remote uses since before electronic definitions of the word remote. Slavery was an example of the remote uses by an overseas method that was using fact-cheaping nature, that was using identity. It was also the identity thefts and frauds of the countries, of the names of the countries involved with that. So the conflicts and conflicts resolutions would maintain and are maintained. Self-value, same thing. All identity ground locations. Then everyone goes home from that, those locations where everyone lives. This is invisible but still discernible. Breaching method. Predicate acts delivery system method. I am not a lawyer. Each of the sciences are recorded self-value to bridge the identity ground locations and styles pretending other in relationship to nature. And see, the narratives towards that is where and how they're exploiting truths. They're using truths to lie. Where and how we have a hierarchy. Interbranch. Each branch has a hierarchy. See, but they're using that hierarchy that is ourselves, America. But they're using it to hide where, just because the other nations, same thing. And there are roles with that here and there, where identity ground locations originally and still, all parts of their sophistication are maintained self-valued as styles of logic that can't afford logic short words proper, can't afford correlation proper for the answer / as to all questions, which is in relationship to the identity that inventions work or not, relationship to it. They are further positive or not in relationship to it. So the ancients, the semi-ancients, and latter semi-ancients are with, from the time, latter semi-ancients are going to be referred to as from 2000 AD to the time of Rasulullah, also known as, referred to as Muhammad in American English. Thank God we had multi-front counters to semi-ancient, already criminally foreign influenced human fact-shaping nature, human sciences, human identity of relationship to that which causes positive or negative value nature progressions. As that identity, that again, it's not just, it's an increasing identity of volume. One identity of volume, each identity of volume has a distinct identity of relationship to itself. It has the value of that increasing, positive or negative, but per this other natural, native system, and preservation of it, and therefore of its fact-shaping nature, and therefore its fact-shaping nature defenses of itself, of its premises, of its sequence treatments, of its finite, active, and progressive treatments, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, of its identity treatments. And this again, where and how the cell nucleus, cell body, cell wall share an identity. And those walls share each other, making the body of the fruit or the life form. There is a system that no one invents. It revealed us. See, but we are now tactical ulterior from its system. All exceptions in exception nature are in demonstration of it. We are not using the science of invention, but as victims, but as victim predators. So we have to have mandated law follow outside of court, though. It is truth used to lie. That change comes through courts first, but it comes anywhere. See, they're supposed to follow law outside, but they haven't been, and it's all inside and outside, all three branches. but it is also how originally and still overt criminal enterprise is, distinct ones, with distinct motivations, natures, needs, interests for evil. All victim predators for the same worse, bonding that private criminal enterprises. All crazy serial killers, regular killers, people involved with this. Everyone goes home. Everyone goes to job sites. Everyone goes where other people are going to be. See, investigators, there were victims, but there were also victim predators, per where and how all identity ground locations were being and having been used, hundreds of nations at once, so they could keep the self-defended and self-valued individually grouped and together. To correlation nature, to American history told properly per science, sequence true, it is increasingly positive to admit and understand how James Madison didn't have free speech, and how his plan and his backing is what really made the Boston Tea Party, and how other is self-cultivated, but it is maintained per a fact-cheating, nature-oriented breaching method that non-distinctly is the real cause of the overt criminal enterprises and the private ones, and the overtly insidious individual sick victim predator like serial killers, people associated with areas where there are shootings all the time. These are off-campuses maintained collusions with fake sides of correlation nature, imposed by a method that has a whole bunch of methods bonded. This is recorded how they have kids in the same grade, but they have people in other classes in the same grade. But you never see them, and they're spreading rumors and lies. And they're exploiting that, because then they're exploiting it. Then you have 2 years in middle school in my town. This is the same ones intercities, though. These are the same people, fact-cheating, nature-oriented uses of clear as day remote uses of the people of the North End, of the different parts of Hartford and of Wethersfield, the same way. These are the interbranch, the prisons with them, all tied to them, all where everyone goes home to work, where they know people that live near there, where corners are, where parks are, where our geographical distinctions in relationship to our fact-cheating nature, all along routes, because this is already having been needing to hide sequence shifts, finite, active, progressive lies, and is used remotely in relationship to what set out the pathology of roads and the narratives with it, where they compared it to the past roads, leaving out the tactical breaching method employed, same exact method against Native Americans first, causing them forced to respond as fact-cheating nature to more negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures than they had time to, and sustained ways. So they had to develop fact-cheating nature styles, further and further, incapable of defending themselves as fact-cheating nature and remembering and of affording means to have remembered that which they were separated from. Same exact thing everyone was separated from. Ancient revelations that came since before science became criminally foreign influenced, and everyone speak away from that. We're all good people. We're the scientists. We rely on these experts. We have faith in them. Everyone and everything is fake. CT must break. So, George Washington came to Wethersfield, Connecticut, and he was involved with communications with a French general here, who helped right before we won the last physical battle of the Revolutionary War. He had to secure help for that. He had to become an extorted nation like the rest of them, or it would have been worse. They were going in phases against the Native Americans, against everyone. They had been doing this since semi-ancient times. So we're going to take modern times and plus, so we have the people that preserve the religions, not realizing their inclusion. Where and how. We have psychology, where people say, oh, I don't believe in that religion. Well, where is that formally defended by the religion? Like, in other words, they have doctors involved with mental laws where they have readings of statutes where they have rights to hide lies from parents. And they've been using that, and so therefore they have rights to cover things up. But they've been using that originally still was corrupt. So all their evidence treatments, all exceptions were being and having been exploited by them, which is in relationship to how, where, and how the identity, the ground locations of every branch of government, of every database relationships, private, other, every campus, every of age and nature, every science further, per where and how we are, fact should be nature exploited. One thing that slavery is proofs of always is that, not denying any exceptions, is that people were being used remotely since before computers, and in relation in database as database relationships, as fact treatment nature, in sustained manner and method. Note where we are forced to speak about positive and negative because of identity's simultaneous relationship to positive and negative, and to that identity of value progression that invented where and how and why species are. Cell nucleus, cell body, cell wall. Cell walls connect, not just water and elements of earth coming through, and gases. Invisible but still discernible, the identity of relativity, the identity of the Santa Claus when you add the E to it. And when you're teaching English properly, when you're teaching about the sciences properly, you're understanding why and how. The predicate act is in relationship to predicate acts are discerned to counter predicate acts, the discernment of criminal enterprises, of criminal foreign influences, or of criminal interstate, this is worse than internations, a predicate acts delivery system method that forced slavery, and that forces no one to speak honestly about it, while simultaneously forcing everyone to pretend other. And while simultaneously pretending that the conflicts and the resolutions where we are fact treatment nature can be decided by courts that are already criminally involved with the locations, all of them, being and having been used remotely with their own locations, even where everyone lives. We are per how we are at times exploited, value/value progression. So we have all kinds of men and women of each age that are maintained self-valued predators as victims specifically for that. Specifically for where this is the same, distinctly only to keep how non-distinctly the same pathology of infrastructure of means to it, of value of what things can afford, how much each dollar is worth. This is in relationship to things that can be measured, increasingly self-valued, being and having been employed not just employed, deployed. Motivations, natures, needs, interests, identity of the grounds, identities, identity of relationship to where and how, the words of each individual, our correlation nature other than is the proper answer / as to the questions. So where we have the obligations to force people to be educated. This breaching method knew that we were going to have to do that. This knew that we were going to have to respond to what was thwarting those efforts. What was embracing those efforts to keep them. Roles with the criminal and ceaseless natures and positive and negative. And collusion on off all the identical locations. And in particular, for game, which is inseparable from discerning what's actually having been going on with the campuses now, vertically and horizontally. So, and admission of this reveals where and how we've had needs to have counters to things and treatments associated with fact-cheating, nature-oriented, where grounds to like things like sanctions, nuclear weapons, bombs, wars, where you have to have fact-cheating nature counters to things that are completely unfathomable. The reason they're fathomable is because all the fake fathomable. No, but fake integrity of the sciences individually grouped in together. Opinions regarding that. They are requiring self-valued uses of time always too fast, too slow, to prevent voices from demonstrating. Courts and the branches of government individually grouped and together as crime methods and natures against each standing position of correlation nature, as victims, in collusion with all the overtly criminal, all that overtly other police shared with them, / insidiously, and everyone denied it anyway. So we don't have free speech. So offensively, we have to pretend other. So we have to counter the fact-cheating nature-oriented uses of identity ground locations, like the buildings next to the the Connecticut News locations. How they keep victims employed, everyone speaking throughout, so that everyone else forced, so they could keep victim predators. So they could keep collusion against who notes that. So they could have real motivations to pretend, oh, well, he's talking about us. But they sequence shifting. So we have to be able to report sequence shifting. We have to be able to report departments where their own police department, their own police officers, other police departments, intercities, and private police. Recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. My town's police chief 1 year ago, involved with a whole bunch of federal criminals before they got caught for different things. And since, with also further relevant identity theft frauds in the forms also of predicate acts with databases, uses of whole, like a former Mayor Gold. There's an Allison Mulcahy and her sister. I never had a conversation with them. There's also a Jonathan Mayano, others who were recorded, confessed, and demonstrated, confirmed, involved with investigators, with a whole bunch of people with foreign and domestic, overt criminal enterprises, private, and other, involved with their narratives tied to the databases, in this method with the kids in other classes, stealing that with the identity thefts and frauds rules. Also, where and how that is overt evidence, where and how the overt / insidious justifications of breaching method applied and employed. Slavery rules. See, they also have subjects, they separate subjects that are inseparable. Because this is the identity thefts and frauds. It's differentially worse. Especially. It's especially differentially. See, there's such a thing as especially differentially. And this is especially differentially America, and we have to enable, especially initially other nations, to realize, and we have to do it by realizing how the ground was tactically denatured, and that leads So then we don't have to worry about who's honest or not. We could measure it. In other words, science reveals is most probable. No, so here I'm jumping, but yeah, science. Just from what I know, the mountains bring. You go high enough, you get real cold. It freezes. Water comes down. It builds up. Rivers come. So where the Sahara Desert is, northern Africa, there's a these are also people with Central Connecticut State University involved in New Britain, Connecticut, that are involved with a whole bunch of different sciences, so departments. But they're also involved with interbranch like courts. They're family members, police forms, former director of the FBI, a whole bunch of people tied to him that are involved with predicate acts leading up to and in the World Trade Center attack context in New York City. This is Connecticut is tied also to other in Washington D.C. is involved with investigations and investigators that have been using also people like all the police forms, their identities, investigators, even when they in their regular life when they walk up to someone, because they're needed to hide sequence shifts, they're needed to hide roles, preventing police reports offensively by pretending people had conversations and tried to make a police report in context where they never did. As people involved with identity thefts of students in other classes, like two Mendez police. I never had a class with them. They're involved with lie progressions with people in my high school that are also recorded, confessed, and demonstrated involved with identity thefts and frauds and federal crime like against kids and against people of all ages when they were in middle school that were also connected to lie progressions tied to when they were in grammar school. Now these are also locations like near the Cove where they used to have slave quarters in Wethersfield, Connecticut. George Washington had to leave slavery in the North sickly distinctly from how it was in the South. Everyone leaves out the evidence how sickly not distinctly was to hide how sickly not distinctly. Not just to hide it, to keep everyone invested roles, screening it, and enforcing it, not to be told on, while everyone's pretending to be about free speech. This is about the remote uses of the human fact-cheaping nature. I'm not a doctor. This is about the human fact-cheaping nature syndrome, how we could counter it. We could turn all the negatives at once into positive. Only one way. That is native pure system. So we could use the most, they set up what human fact-cheaping nature would blame on other things other than themselves. The real causes of what stacked people. And they have all victims juxtaposed with motivations, natures, needs, interests, now reliant upon people. Stacking. Simultaneously relevant to just as bad, worse, fact-cheaping nature oriented, not physically. It's worse physically. In other words, that's designed to cause negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures that were breaching method, our breaching method being and having been self-valued, fact-cheaping nature oriented, formerly and other. This is all used remotely. It is recorded where and how the overt criminal enterprises and the private ones are kept needing to hide the same sequence shifts, same finite, active, progressive lies, identity thefts and frauds, roles, and uses of identity ground locations and of sciences of campuses that the branches of government need to, and with a whole bunch of other nations. So when we start revealing that, how we could discern this, like I never had a conversation with Debbie Gold who pretended other. She's rolls with O'Brien family, with a whole bunch of other nations, with the people that also with New Britain, dozens of people in New Britain Superior Court and Middletown courts are involved also with this, Wethersfield, intercities. Now these are mayors retired and standing, associated also with people on off the state judicial branch offices, tied to Enzo Faenza and another black man used remotely with KKK themed, Confederate flag themed military police that are also involved with the Washington D.C. Pentagon and Washington D.C. courts, roles with also the Ninth Circuit Court leading up to and in the World Trade Center attack, and the people associated with the illusions on off that location, and their uses of the Saudi identities, for example. And while they have all these other identities of nations, where and how the identity of the ground locations uses was the motivation. They're just individually grouped and together, say. So where they had counters to that, against our own, we had more inclusion, and they were pretending they're legitimate. So there's a Dillon family, and there are also officers forging and switching names, fabricating police with them, like Mendez police, that are involved intercities on and off campuses. There are people, a whole bunch of people from Central Connecticut State University recorded, confessed, and demonstrated, confirmed, involved with the narratives associated with falsified police reports, and fabricated audio and video, also with killers, and with the body dumping spots of the killers, and of the people that associated next to them that are involved with predicate acts with them, uses of identity of the grounds locations with them. Again, where and how investigators, and uses of the identities of the identities of the law, like CNN recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed that they were influenced by, as victims by their interbranch sources to make readings of statutes that are criminally foreign influence delusions. Right, you can't defend the logic to that and afford the roles with, if they're insulated to CNN, people who run the policing of the internet and of the roles with that. They're preventing me from making a complaint to you about mandated law being and having been prevented outside of courts that have been fabricating audio and video with killers. Now these are police departments and locations and uses of routes, like all along Route 3 that goes by the state judicial branch offices, all along the South Highway, for example, which crosses over that. Note there's a reported and filmed shooting, real or made up. You can't tell if they're acting now because the news media is recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed having been roles with foreign and domestic medical families, also ones that are police forms, and judges' family members, involved with the corner of Town Line Drive and South Highway, for example, and involved with shopping centers and things like that. And sense and sensibilities where there are foreign and domestic relations, where they have the identity thefts of the people that are, involved with that, which is sustained identity thefts, frauds, which is sustained child abuses and elderly abuses that would never have been. These are not the means of science. This is not science, evolution science. So it is. Evolution science is about the identity of relativity, identity of relationship to itself and the value of that. It is greater than infinity while being more finite than three identities of zero. And this is discernible. See, we have the identity of the ground relationships into economic positions taken as incomplete counters. So it's also juxtaposed with prevented economic positions. We have methods of natures of extortion and of extortion roles self-valued on a mass extent. They use methods like pretending people have conspiracy theories relevant to where and how mandated law people pretending to be for it are preventing people from reporting things outside of courts, outside of police locations, outside of interbranch locations because they have the interbranch family member that already took part with treatments of positive and negative and all others' identities and time and worth and their justifications of it as roles needing to hide life-progressions, as roles delusions wrought. What caused the Boston Tea Party? A prayer for our correlation lost. Boxing must pause.